Okay, I'm going to start cutting now because all of my pieces are laid out. They're all measured up. I'm going to take my scissors, and once again with the fabric laying, make sure the fabric is really flat on the table, that you're standing up to do this job, because if you don't, if you're sitting down, you just don't have the flexibility. You need your shoulder to be able to move around. Now what I'm doing here is, because it's a big piece of stretch fabric that will want to move and the tissue paper will want to rip, I'm going to roughly cut out my individual pieces first without taking too much of the excess fabric away, but just around the outside edge of each pattern piece. Cut them out roughly first. Once again, you're practicing really big, lovely long cuts. Okay. Because what we need to be able to do is turn these around as we cut them. Like we did when we were tracing out the pattern piece, you need to move the piece around so that you're cutting on a comfortable angle, okay? Once we've got the piece looking like this and it is separated from the rest of the fabric, then what we have to do is cut very slowly and carefully. This should take a long time. If you cut this too quickly, you will probably make mistakes and you don't get a spare piece of fabric to make another t-shirt from. You've got to get this right the first time. Okay, so you've got to be very careful. You try and cut in as long a stroke as you can, but if you can't, just make sure you don't end up with jaggedy pieces, that you're well in control of the scissors. Okay, so you'll notice I'm turning my piece of fabric around as I cut. You have to cut right along the edge of the paper. Try not to cut the paper, because obviously that will alter the shape of the pattern piece. Flip it around. Take your time. Now I'm quite fast at this. I'd anticipate that you are much slower even than this, okay, because you have to get this right. Sometimes slow and steady wins the race. Okay, so I have cut out my first sleeve, my first pattern piece out of the fabric. You will notice here that I have a mark that I've traced in here and a mark that I've traced in here. We actually have to transfer that marking onto the fabric, and this is how you do it. They're called notches, and they're really important for when we're putting the pattern pieces together into the t-shirt. You take your scissors and in a very small short cut, you just snip to the end of the line. That's it. One snip to the end of the line, and that transfers the marking onto the fabric. What you need to do now is go on and continue cutting out the individual pattern pieces and also marking in the notches for each piece. Okay, so I finished cutting all 4 pattern pieces out of my fabric, and it's time to take the pins out. But it's really easy to confuse the pattern pieces. Once you've taken the paper off that's labelled, how can you tell which piece is which? So what I do is I transfer a bit of information onto a scrap piece of paper that I've cut out. I write down the name, the number of the pattern piece. I also put my initials, so if I leave it somewhere in the classroom, we know who to give it back to. I'm going to write it's the sleeve piece, and it's piece number 2. I've also done a sleeve piece number 1, so that I know that I've got 2 sleeve pieces. So what I'll do then is I will take the pattern, take the paper pattern off the fabric, and I will pin just once with one pin into that sleeve pattern piece, and also the front piece and the back piece, so they are still labelled once we take the paper off. So now I have all of my 4 pieces cut out, they're all labelled with the paper, and we're ready to start sewing. Now at this stage you might find, you'll see that the edges of the fabric, because it's knitted, it actually wants to curl up. and that can be a little bit of an irritation more than anything. So what I tend to do at this point in time is I give the fabric pieces a little bit of an iron, just a gentle iron. You set the iron on wool. Even though the fabric is cotton, it does have elastic knitted into it, and elastic of course is rubber, and rubber can melt if temperature is too high. So what I do is I set up my iron for wool. I take each piece over individually. Before I iron it, I take the piece of paper off, just sit it aside, and I give each pattern piece a gentle iron before I sew. It's important while you're sewing, after each sewing step, that you take your t-shirt pieces to the iron and give them a press. You end up with a much more professional finish. Okay, so my iron is set for wool. I'm just waiting for it to heat up. I have my sleeve piece sitting on the ironing board ready to iron. I'm going to take the paper and the pin away. Just sit it to the side so I don't lose it and I don't get confused. Don't take all of the paper pieces out at the same time. What you want to do is get your piece sitting as flat as you can on your ironing board. Once again, you know, don't do this slapdash. Take care with every step of the way. I just have a little bit of a test of the iron on the ironing board first, just to check that no dirty water is going to come out of it, because it's a steam iron, and sometimes as they get older, they can play up a little bit. So I just give that a gentle, yep, it's working fine. And then just a quick, gentle, don't press down with the iron, just almost, the iron's almost just hovering over the top, and you'll see that makes that nice and flat. Helps to prevent the rolling. Okay, before I take it from the ironing board, I'll replace my label, so once again I don't get confused.